February 8th, 2023 was the kind of day where the air never quite moved over the northern Queensland wetlands. The sky was smeared with heat, and even the crocodiles stayed motionless, draped over muddy banks like stone sculptures. At Warragundy Reptile Sanctuary, the cicadas had already begun to hum as Daniel Royce made his way toward the back enclosure. Brutus's enclosure. The staff knew the signs of a quiet afternoon. Tour groups moved slow. The radio stayed mostly silent, but that silence didn't last, because just after 1:12 p.m., the quiet was broken by a call that would rattle through every corridor of the sanctuary. Emergency, Warragundy Reptile Sanctuary. We've got to keep her down. Crocodile enclosure. He's not responding. We need help, now. The voice was breathless, rushed. In the background, someone shouted Daniel's name. Others were yelling for bolt cutters, stretchers. Radios crackled with frantic instructions. What began as a routine feeding demonstration had erupted into the unthinkable. A fatal attack by a 5-meter saltwater crocodile named Brutus. Daniel Royce wasn't a rookie. He wasn't distracted. He wasn't careless. He was one of the most experienced crocodile handlers in the country. And still, in a matter of seconds, all the trust, all the skill, all the years of careful work vanished into the chaos of a single misstep. Witnesses stood frozen behind the viewing glass, some screaming, others already filming, too stunned to move. Before we go any further, take a moment. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe that behind every headline is a life worth knowing, then share this story and follow the channel so we can keep uncovering the truth behind the headlines. Because this is more than a tragedy. It's the end of something rare. This is the story of Daniel Royce, a man who dedicated his life to understanding nature's most dangerous reptiles and who lost that life in one of the most horrifying ways imaginable. To those who watched from the sanctuary's public platforms, Daniel was the face of calm. Tall, lean, sun-browned, and almost always smiling, he made handling crocodiles look effortless. But that effortlessness was an illusion, built on decades of sweat, study, and the kind of instinct that can't be taught in a classroom. He'd grown up in the Northern Territory, raised on the edges of wetlands and rivers where crocodiles were more than legends. They were neighbors. His childhood wasn't about cartoons or football. It was boats, bait, and binoculars. He tagged his first freshwater croc at 17. At 21, he joined a regional conservation unit tracking rogue males that had strayed into livestock fields. Daniel wasn't interested in taming crocodiles. He didn't want to dominate them. He wanted to understand them. He believed fiercely that fear wasn't the answer, knowledge was. At Warragundy Reptile Sanctuary, where he spent the last 14 years of his life, he became the crocodile program's director, overseeing 22 individuals, including 2 massive males that had been relocated after attacking boats. Brutus was one of them. Captured near the Dali River, Brutus had a reputation before he ever arrived at the sanctuary. 20 feet long, nearly 1,200 kilograms, with a blind left eye and the patience of a stone, he was known for sudden, unpredictable lunges. Daniel respected him, fed him personally, never rushed a session, never skipped a precaution, until the day he did. It was supposed to be a controlled demonstration. Nothing flashy, just a midday feeding for guests gathered behind reinforced glass. The temperature was hovering just below 90 degrees, and Brutus had been especially sluggish all morning. He hadn't responded to his usual target poll or shown any interest in the food during the morning check. Daniel entered the enclosure just before 1 p.m., wearing his standard khaki gear and carrying a large haunch of kangaroo meat in a steel pail. One trainer accompanied him outside the fence, manning the gate. Another stood behind the secondary safety rail with a tranquilizer dart, though it was never loaded. Brutus had been docile for months. What happened next unfolded in under 5 seconds. As Daniel stepped toward the edge of the lagoon, meat in hand, Brutus launched upward from beneath the waterline with a force no one anticipated. There was no warning growl, no rise to the surface, just a single snap. His jaws closed around Daniel's upper body and dragged him into the water with terrifying speed. Screams erupted. Radios chirped. The gate trainer activated the emergency siren and opened the interior rail, but it was already too late. Inside the lagoon, the water frothed red. Brutus performed what's known as a death roll, spinning underwater with Daniel still caught in his grip. Trainers tried deploying bait to distract him, but the crocodile ignored it. It took nearly 4 minutes for Brutus to release Daniel's body, and when he did, the damage was irreversible. By the time Daniel was pulled from the enclosure, he had no pulse. News of the incident hit the wildlife community like a landslide. Within hours, headlines around the world ran with the story, "Veteran crocodile keeper killed in Queensland sanctuary." The sanctuary was shut down pending an investigation. The Queensland Department of Environment and Science launched an internal review, examining staff protocols, enclosure design, and Brutus's behavioral history. The incident was the first fatal crocodile attack on a handler in the region in nearly 2 decades. For those who knew Daniel, the headlines were unbearable. He was more than a statistic. He had trained dozens of junior keepers, written multiple peer-reviewed papers on crocodile cognition, and even lobbied for reforms in how saltwater crocodiles were relocated and managed after human encounters. His voice had been respected not just in Australia, but internationally. Former colleagues described him as meticulous, compassionate, not a thrill seeker, but someone who believed people could live alongside predators, not by taming them, but by respecting them. And Brutus? Brutus had always been a test of that belief, a reminder that nature does not care about familiarity. Daniel's family released a brief statement. Daniel knew the risks of his work. He accepted them fully. His love for these animals was his life's purpose. We ask for privacy as we grieve. What happened at Warragundy reignited long-simmering debates about crocodile captivity. Are large, apex predators like Brutus ever truly safe to handle? Do routine feeding demonstrations create a false sense of predictability? And what does it mean to care for animals that could end a life in seconds? Some called for stricter regulations, others for a complete end to crocodile shows. A few even demanded that Brutus be euthanized. But those who worked closest with Daniel argued against it. He would never have wanted that, said Laura Chen, his longtime colleague and co-trainer. Brutus did what Brutus was made to do. We take calculated risks every day. That doesn't make it senseless. It makes it real. Experts pointed out that crocodile attacks in captivity are exceedingly rare, especially in facilities with strong safety records like Warragundy. But the lesson was clear. Even the best trained professionals operate in the shadow of uncertainty. The wild may be enclosed, but it is never truly tamed. In the weeks following Daniel's death, the sanctuary transformed. Brutus was moved to a non-exhibition tank. All in-enclosure feeding sessions were suspended indefinitely. A third safety barrier was added to all crocodilian habitats, and tranquilizers were loaded for every public event. More than changes in protocol, though, it was Daniel's absence that reshaped the place. Trainers walked quieter, guests asked more questions, and beside the viewing glass at Brutus's lagoon, a new plaque appeared. In memory of Daniel Royce, he walked with giants, he listened more than he spoke, and he never forgot who he was sharing space with. The Royce Fund was established just 6 days after the attack, created by Daniel's partner and colleagues to support field research, youth mentorship in wildlife care, and facility upgrades for small sanctuaries across Queensland. Within a month, it had raised over $200,000. At his memorial, a junior handler named Jess spoke through tears. He never made us feel like we had to be fearless, just prepared, and that if we respected the animals, really respected them, we might earn their peace, or at least their patience. What happened to Daniel Royce wasn't fair. It wasn't the result of incompetence or recklessness. It was the reality of working with creatures whose instincts don't change just because we think we understand them. That truth is heavy. It doesn't comfort, but it does clarify. Daniel lived a life most people wouldn't dare imagine. Not for glory, not for thrills, but because he believed that the world was still wild and that some people had to stand at the threshold. He stood there until the end. So if this story shook you, let it settle into something more than fear. Let it be a reason to support wildlife education, to talk about real risks with real context, and to honor those who don't just study the natural world, but live inside it. Because Daniel Royce didn't die for a show. He died for a relationship, and that's a story worth remembering. He reminded us that understanding something dangerous isn't about conquering it. It's about coexisting with it on its own terms. In life, he gave people the courage to stand near the wild. In death, he leaves us with the responsibility to carry that courage forward. Thank you for watching.